All right, present.
Thank you. Councillor Muir. Oh no, sorry, Councillor Muir was apologies. Gavin McCormack.
Hello.
Luke Simpkin on behalf of
Hi.
Andy Roswell.
Hiya, good evening.
Ruben Ayu.
Present.
Don't know why I said Alan, sorry. Alice Sims.
Present.
Lewis Franklin.
Present.
Gavin McCormick.
Oh, yep. Here again.
Roger Lovegrove. Roger Lovegrove.
Yeah, here. Sorry, yeah.
John Somerville.
Hello.
Christine Watson.
Hello.
And John Webb. So, sorry,
Audio.
okay.
Penny, it's Gerald Morris here. You missed me out.
Oh,
I'm here.
sorry. Okay.
And Sarah Dingley as well. Councillor Sarah Dingley.
Okay, I've marked you as well now. Sorry.
Penny, I've just turned up as well.
Councillor Hoskins. Okay.
Thanks.
Anybody else I've missed?
I believe John Webb is having his own technical issues.
Yeah, yes. He's just put a message up to say he'll need to log in via a tablet to get audio working. So,
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And it wasn't clear a second ago. I can hear you.
Can I hand back to the chair then, please?
Okay, that's everyone. Yeah, and we're just waiting on John.
Yes.
Do we have any apologies for absence?
The only apologies I've received is from Michael Muir.
Okay, no Michael tonight. Can we please go through the minutes of the previous meeting? I propose, so we go through. I propose it would take as read and approve as a true record the minutes of the meeting of the panels held on the 23rd of February 2021, 8th of June 2021, and 6th of July 2021. Can I have a seconder? Don't all jump up at once.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Thank you, Steve. Okay. I would like to welcome members of the public, including our registered speakers, to the meeting, and thank you for your attendance. And thank you, yes, for coming. In accordance with county policy, this meeting is being audio recorded as well as filmed. The audio recordings will be available to view on mod.gov and the film recording via the NHDC YouTube channel. Members are reminded to make a declaration of interest before an item. The detailed reminder about this and speaking rights is set out under Chair's announcements on the agenda. Do we have any other business? I don't believe there is. Unless there's something new. No. Okay, thank you. Right, so next up we've got the work programme and action tracker, and it's Ruben Avu to present.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, panel members. Appreciate we've got quite a busy agenda, so I'm going to be quite swift through the action tracker and information note. I'd like to draw your attention to, on the information note of section 2.2, about the work that the corporate policy team have been involved in. This sort of brings you up to speed with where we're at with things. So the first part I'd like to draw your attention to is our contributions to the Hertfordshire Climate Change and Sustainability Partnership. As you remember, it's a partnership of all 10 districts and the County Council and the Local Enterprise Partnership. We lead on the biodiversity subgroup, and all of the subgroups were tasked to come up with an action plan to talk about. One was around water, one was around carbon reduction, biodiversity and transport. We led on the biodiversity one. We have prepared an action plan and we've moved on a little bit. We've now got all our comments back from our stakeholders for our engagement period over the summer. We're now putting those together, and then we're going to take that back for approval to the partnership board in the next few months. We're also working on biodiversity baseline contract, which will identify parcels of land for the biodiversity net gain, which is going to come in the Environment Bill soon. I think we're about to award to a successful bidder, and that work will start in the beginning of October and hopefully be delivered by 2022. You will recall we had a presentation last team from a behavioural change unit officer, Ludo, on the back of that, and I think we've all acknowledged that this is quite an important part of the work we are going to do, that a subgroup has been formed together as one of the new subgroups at the county level. So we'll see what happens there, and we'll feed back any relevant things back to yourselves. We are ongoing with our monthly eco actions. The next one in September will be around clothing, so that will be available in NH Now, which is an online magazine for residents. It'll be in the Recycling Environment Bulletin and the Insight magazine, which is for staff. Next point, I think last time we talked about carbon footprint calculators. We had a presentation from Annie. We've gone away and looked at a number of carbon footprint calculators that are available free online. And our suggestion is, having looked at a number of them, they seem to be very good. It seems a bit disingenuous to create our own. So if the panel were minded, we could go away and come up with a top 10 of these calculators, then we could advertise that on our social medias to residents in North Hertfordshire. But happy to take that, your comments on that one. And then lastly, I want to pick up that there is a Green Festival in Letchworth on Saturday the 11th. The NHDC will have a stand there. It will be manned by Green Space officers and officers from the waste team. We've got a poster there highlighting our completed and proposed actions from our climate change strategy. And the other part of the poster will also advertise the 10,000 trees that we are giving away, which will start in autumn 2021. The poster includes information about how to sign up to get yourself a free tree. To reduce paper, we've used QR codes and get more information about what we're doing, and seems like a good way forward for that. Diane, Ketcher and Sue Lyons are wholesale stands there. Maybe Christine, I don't know if Christine's going to be there as well, but she might provide some more detail there. So that's all I want to talk about in the information note. In terms of the action tracker, you'll notice towards the end, I've added some more completed ones that we picked up last week. So the one around greater litter awareness, the repair and purpose campaigns, which are on the website, the monthly education campaigns that I've just talked about. I will have circulated to you all details of the Zero Waste Europe website, and I circulated the Hearts Waste Partnership annual report, and I'll do that on an ongoing basis so you're aware of those sorts of things. And the last two around the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan work that's going on now. I know that a first stakeholder presentation was held in July. I believe there's more work to be done in October, and I think they're looking to have things in place by December. And I know Julia Zanander was at one of those stakeholder meetings, but unfortunately she's not here. So that's all I need to say. Happy to take any questions or comments from the panel.
Is there any? Okay, so I saw Steve's what's it hand went up first. So Steve first, and then Sarah Dingley.
So I think in terms of the carbon footprint calculators, I agree with the suggestion that there's lots around. It doesn't make any sense to create another one. What we should be doing is trying to identify good ones that people in North Hertfordshire might want to use. And I think there's a danger in those that are too simplistic. There's a danger in those that are too complex. But what is too simplistic and what is too complex varies. People have different appetites for the amount of effort they're prepared to put in these things. So I think actually if we can point people towards several of them with a range of capabilities, that might achieve the best result in terms of getting people to think about their own position and get some guidance about what they can do about it. So I think if that's a viable way forward, that's probably the best thing to do.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Councillor Sarah Dingley.
Thank you. Yeah, just a straightforward one, really. What's the take-up been on the trees?
You know what, Sarah? I don't know. I'll be honest. I will find out for you, and I will email everyone when I have an answer. I know Andrew Mills is on annual leave at the moment, but I'll make inquiries and let you know.
Thank you, Ruben. I signed up for a tree. So any other questions? You can wave or you can put up your electric hand. Christine Watson.
Yes, thank you. Ruben, I guess you were referring to me as Christine, I hope.
Yes.
I shall only be going as a member of the public to the Letchworth Festival on Saturday, but I hope to do something very similar. I'm halfway through organising a Baldock Eco Fest on Saturday, October the 30th. And we're looking to do similar things, but maybe not quite so formal. We are not having formal talks, but just stalls where people can meet people. And I have asked Andrew Hills whether he would come and do a stall. And Steve, I think I've asked you also whether you would come to inform us about the trees. How much these overlap, I don't know. So I'm ready to be told that. But that will be a similar event in Baldock on the 30th of October.
There is, so the Green Festival is on Saturday, the 11th of September in Letchworth, and it starts at 10 and ends at 5. And then that's September, on the 24th and 25th of October, the weekend before, there is a similar event, I believe, happening in Royston. And so, yes, it looks like there's a few weekends there with some that would work. Doesn't look like too much overlapping. Any other questions or comments? Okay, Gerald Morris and then George. You're on mute, Gerald.
Haven't done a Zoom for so long. Thank you. Yeah, Ruben,
oh, you've got Gerald. You've got an echo. It's quite.
Have I?
Yeah.
Is it bad?
Yes.
Oh, don't know what to do about that.
It's like you're talking to me in a big church hall or something.
Sorry. Hold on. Any better or not?
That's better, much better.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Sorry. Not a very good start,
okay.
really, is it? Not a good start.
We've all had our technical issues already.
Explore the possibility, under the action track, explore the possibility of community composting. I don't remember that. Is that an alternative to the brown bin or the recycling centres? I don't quite, I wonder if you can just clarify that, Ruben.
I think it was one of the early suggestions at one of our early environment panel meetings to explore that possibility. I think COVID has stretched the resource of those officers to have that conversation at the moment. I think you're all aware that the waste teams are having immense issues at the moment. So I think we've kind of said we'll park that one for the moment until I say normality, but you know what I mean, Gerald.
Yeah.
Once we're in that position to go, well, let's look at the whole gamut of things. It might be something we'll explore in the future.
But sorry, I just don't understand. If people can't afford brown bins, let's assume brown bins are working well. We know they're not, but anyway, if people can't afford a brown bin, that's fine. But they can go to a recycling centre anyway, in all the towns. So I just don't understand it. That's all. To the recycling centres. Yeah, I mean Royston, they've all got them, haven't they? Where you can actually take your compostable material. That's all.
Sure. I think it's something we'll need to review down the line, but I take your point.
Okay, thank you.
Just coming back on the brown bins, Gerald, they are running and working and being collected, and people are signing up for them, and we're one of the last few authorities that are still collecting garden waste regarding the brown bins. So we're all doing what we can. And so it's Gerald, and now it's George.
Thank you. I was just going to carry on from the idea of offering sort of multiple carbon footprint calculators, because I quite like the idea of having sort of here's the one if you really want the detail, here's the one if you want your broad brush strokes thing. I was just going to suggest, if we do go that way, do sanity check that they give roughly the same answers if given similar sorts of data, because someone's going to, and they'll make a fuss about, well, these calculators don't agree with each other if they spot that they don't. That was all.
Okay, thank you, George. Ruben, did you want to come back on that, or are we happy to move on?
That makes eminent sense, George. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. Now, any more? I just want to keep an eye on time. But are there any more comments or questions that are very pressing before we move on? No, good. Right. So next we have part 7 of the agenda, the Renewable Energy Generation Beyond Group presentation. We're going to receive a presentation from Gavin McCormick of Beyond Group on renewable energy generation. So Gavin, if you're ready, can I hand over to you?
Yes, evening all. Thank you for the invitation. It's lovely to meet you all. I'm just going to share my screen. Bear with me a second. So if someone could let me know if you can see a presentation slide.
Yep.
Yes.
Fantastic. Brilliant. I took a slight slant on the topic because I felt that whilst it was largely focused around renewable energy generation, solar PV, EV, I felt that there's a wider impact assessment around the development of the government's net zero plans, the role of green gas and the electrification of heat and transport. And I think it all kind of plays into the same investment argument. So I'm going to attempt within 15 minutes to give you a good broad brush overview of the markets. To start, there we go. Fantastic. Very briefly, you're all aware that the government has enshrined its position in that we'll be looking at a 78% reduction from 1990 levels in emissions by 2035. That's looking to support the overall ambition to achieve net zero by 2050. So what does that mean? That's reducing demand for energy across the UK. So that's looking at efficiency measures. LED lighting is a great example of that. It's changing the way in which society makes choices. So trying to move away from carbon intensive activities. It's electrification of heat and transport, but also supported by the continued expansion of renewable and low carbon power generation. It's also the development of a hydrogen economy, decarbonising heat, looking at energy dense applications, so sort of long distance HGVs and so forth, and then growing and developing bioenergy and carbon capture and storage. So to just provide a very kind of objective view, because I think everything that's trying to happen at the moment is a mixture of investment, it's a mixture of who will pay, it's a mixture of how much is required by the network in order to make all of this work. So the right hand side is just a very brief snapshot that's been provided by Scottish Power that I thought was quite useful. Key points to take from that with the growth of electric vehicle charging points and the number of homes that will need to install or possibly install heat pumps by 2050, you're looking at an estimated network investment required of around 48.5 billion and around an additional skilled job number of about 115,000. Historically, it's all been largely around solar. But with the growth of EV, the electrification of heat, we're going to see a significant increase in EV charging capability, significant increase in heat pumps, largely as a consequence of the government's announcement that they want to remove traditional gas-fired heating from domestic new build properties by 2025, which I think is slightly optimistic given the last 18 months and where we've gone through. But there is a significant lack of clarity on things like boiler replacement, on retrofitting heat pumps into existing properties, and also the methodology for what I class as concentrated dwellings, so high-rise flats or blocks of flats. And there's no current sort of focus on the risks associated with the rare minerals inherent in battery technology and its evolution. The future is all around smart homes and smart buildings, but fundamentally there are so many different things that need to be done within the UK grid at the moment. It makes it very difficult to see where the government or the markets are going to prioritise that investment, and that will play back to the main core part towards the end around solar and EV, and you'll see the tie-in when we get there. So just to focus just very quickly on some of the individual measures. So reducing demand for energy across the UK and changing the way in which society makes choices. Some pertinent notes there. in that we've started to see the introduction of legislation that will enforce mandatory efficiency measures. Typically, we always had the carrot and the stick. So in theory, the higher the energy price went, the more people would be inclined to put double glazing in where it wasn't in there, change to LED lighting, possibly invest in solar as a way to offset electricity cost. The reality is the higher the energy costs go, a proportion of people will make the change, but the majority of people will simply moan because they simply don't have access or appetite to take that forward. So the government has created what's called MEES, which is the Minimum Energy Efficiency Standards. It is an obligation on domestic and non-domestic landlords to effectively bring their properties to a minimum energy efficiency standard. That standard is currently an E on an energy performance certificate rating. So if any of you lease or are leases on domestic properties, you'll see there'll be an EPC rating that accompanies it, and the majority of commercial buildings subject to lease will have an EPC as well. As we go through to the 2030s, that minimum performance rating is likely to go down to a B, which effectively suggests that at the moment it's not necessarily a risk, but as we move through, buildings will be required to become ever so more efficient, and solar plays a big part of that. Sustainability again is becoming an ever increasing topic. The value of property, the value of organizations, the social awareness created through sustainability is almost putting a price and a standard as to what sustainability means for people. And as we move forward, legislation will change to enforce action. So historically, people would have looked at LED lighting, they would have looked at improving their boiler, they would have looked at putting solar PV on a roof. Now going forward, people will have to start thinking about heat pumps, hydrogen networks, and obviously the current change proposed to EV or petrol and diesel vehicles as we move towards 2030. Gas is very much becoming the new focus, and I think I was sort of remiss of myself if I failed to kind of sort of allude to this point during this meeting, because typically most people will say, actually, my focus is solar. I know the council has done some work on solar, but the government very much has seen the work done within the electricity sector. Renewables will compete with the market. It doesn't require significant amounts of support in order to bring it to market now. So the government has shifted its focus, and it shifted its focus towards gas. Roughly 78% of our heating requirement in the UK comes from natural gas. Natural gas, of course, has an emission associated with it. So the electrification of heat and transport is very much a way to create a quick step change in emissions reduction, purely because you're supporting energy generation through renewables, significant amounts of onshore, offshore wind and solar within the network at the moment. From 2030, under current plans, diesel and petrol cars will no longer be on sale. As a point of note, I think that that excludes motorcycles, HGVs and buses, although I think most organisations from a bus perspective are looking towards the electrification of their fleet, and hybrid vehicles by 2035. And that will require a significant expansion in EV charging points to facilitate that shift. Part of the consideration as well should also be looking at the adoption of hydrogen as a source of fuel. This is probably my single biggest area of risk when I look at the whole renewables piece, because I think gas needs to now come into that renewable spectrum. Currently, the grid is allowed to put 0.1% hydrogen into the UK grid. We have a thing called the Iron Mains gas replacement, which is replacing all the old iron gas pipes that hydrogen and iron gas pipes don't really get on particularly well. So hydrogen as a fuel alongside bioenergy or biocrops is not likely to change much until we probably get into the 2030s. But at the current moment, any heat boiler that was made prior to, let's say, the mid-90s is unlikely to take a hydrogen mix of any substance, and any boiler made since the mid-90s is only likely to take a 23% hydrogen mix before that boiler fails. So of course that becomes a substantial issue where people are focusing on things like solar PV and EV, that actually over the next 10 to 15 years, if the government wants to increase the percentage of hydrogen into the grid, it's going to have a severe problem when it gets to 23%, as of course you can't just stop people's boilers working. So that's a big part towards that decarbonisation challenge, and actually from a renewables perspective, the question of renewables gas or changing the alternative source of heat will become much more pertinent as we move through the next 5 to 10 years. Just very quickly, a graphic illustration of that landscape. We're looking to replace the majority of our natural gas from hydrogen and biomethane. Biomethane comes from waste and food crop. Food crop tends to be less popular because that issue over the long-term sustainability of locally grown food source products. But again, that's just to give you an indication of when looking at policy considerations and decisions, that gas should definitely not be avoided, and early adopters will be the ones that are not necessarily having to suffer the short-term risks as we get towards that point. In terms of EVs, I put the graphic on the right purely because I wanted to put a graphic in there. I felt there was quite a lot of text. We've had a significant increase in ULEVs, or ultra low emission vehicles. 2030 seems quite a long way away, but it will creep up on us quite quickly. I would argue at the moment that the EV sector in itself, I have a personal view that I feel that hydrogen will be the long-term fuel for vehicles, not electric, but that's a personal view that I hold and not many share with me at the moment. But suffice to say, in 14 areas of the UK, you have what's called a DNO, or a distribution network operator. They're the organisation responsible for maintaining the local grid. Electricity has to be balanced. What goes in must come out. There can be no shortfall. So therefore, there's this consistent challenge around forecasting and managing demand. Every household and every commercial and every industrial premise will have what's called a capacity or an allowance. And the idea is that with each DNO area, if every single one of the electrical connections in that area reached its capacity, the grid could still function. So effectively, it is a notional cap on the amount of energy that you can draw at any one time. Placing EV chargers obviously has an increase in that capacity. And the point I will leave you with in this one here is that we had a client recently. They were in Doncaster, so they were a little bit further north than yourselves. They wanted to install 4 22 kilowatt EV chargers. Now, a lot of these chargers come with smart charging, so therefore they will dynamically charge load as they go through. There are lots of grants available. There are lots of different chargers available. The market is consistently moving. And, to be fair, what I present today won't be what the EV market looks like in 6 months' time. It is a very fast-moving feast. But suffice to say that when applying to the local distributor and working out that if the client had 4 Teslas plugged into each one of those 4 chargers, and they required those to be charged all at the same time during working hours, the site in question would have breached its capacity. That comes with penalties, and in most severe cases, the local distributor can turn you off. We applied to the local distributor in order to increase the capacity on the site, and bearing in mind this is a commercial site, so it's not a big industrial user. The cost to increase the capacity on that site was an additional £70,000 to the local distributor to reinforce the network. Now, that's where the challenge comes with EV, is that there's only so much capacity available, and we are still patching a very archaic grid. Bearing in mind, back in the day, electricity was done from very big power stations in the middle of nowhere that came into a very big transmission network that then came into the more localized networks. Now you've got electricity going everywhere. Lots of households and businesses generating solar, lots of EV taking load at weird and wonderful times. Predicting demand of when someone wants to charge their car becomes notoriously difficult. So there is a significant challenge around the consistent growth of EV, especially if this kind of trajectory continues through over the next 10 years, in that it'll be very unlikely that as a UK grid, we will be able to manage that capacity. Perhaps less of a risk per se, I suppose, for the smaller domestic users, but actually when you get into the commercial space, lots of organisations looking to expand their fleet, that may well become a squeeze. So to focus on solar a little bit, if you look at the chart here, you'll see various quarters going back to 2018. Solar historically was done through what's called the feed-in tariff. So you would be paid a premium for putting solar on your roof and generating. There was a significant increase in free solar, which is where a company would come along and put solar on your roof for free, largely in the domestic sector, and they would take that feed-in tariff. That feed-in tariff was around 40p at one point, bearing in mind the electricity cost is at around 15p at the moment, so that's a significant premium. And that feed-in tariff ended in March 2019. You can see there was a significant drop-off in PV. PV in itself, the technology costs have dropped. Paybacks will range from 4 years to 9 years, depending on the size of the installation. And actually, we're starting to see a bit of emergence in PV and battery systems. So we believe that over the next 3 to 4 years, there'll be a rough 30% increase in the number of PV systems that have battery linked to them. And you'll see this widely, adverts and documentation for people looking to put PV and battery in there as well. The market is self-sustaining. It's now driven by its own market, not by government funding. And actually, the next evolution we'll see within PV is around transparent panel technology. So, for example, you can get a film that goes over windows, and that provides a tint to the window, which then provides solar PV as well. So the market in itself is working very well. To look at the planning piece, again, planning back to that point around the local distribution network operator. Generally speaking, most roof-mounted solar PV is covered under permitted development. There are some exclusions there, and most ground mount systems, so PV put on the land, will require planning approval unless the array or the system is less than 9 square meters. You generally find you have to provide local planning authority permissions for systems in excess of 50 kilowatts. I generally suggest that local planning authority permissions are not necessarily an issue where a sensible decision has been taken to place PV. It doesn't disrupt or deharmonize the environment. Any systems below 3.68 kilowatts, these are going to be very small domestic systems, are generally notified post-installation. So generally speaking, for an average domestic household, you can pop PV on your roof, and that just becomes an easy decision. Once you get into large-scale domestic and into the commercial and industrial market, you have what's called a dreaded G59. So this is back to my point earlier around DNO or network investment. You have to apply to the local distribution network for permission to put that PV on your land or on a roof. The DNO can refuse permission to do so based on the risk of exported energy to grid. So in some instances, the network operator, not so much in your area, but in some of the northern areas, may refuse large-scale PV purely for the reason that they're not able to manage the large-scale export that's coming into their network from a PV system. In other instances, the local network may require you to fit an export limitation device. So as a good example there, if any of you go through the Port of Dover, if you look at the Western Docks, their big revival, there's a very big PV system on one of their big warehouses. It's one of mine. The DNO there required them to fit an export limitation device, which cuts the system off the minute it tries to export to the grid. And at that point, that creates a revenue risk because effectively the client is not getting paid for energy exported to grid because the system's being shut down. And again, as the more EV that goes into a grid, the more PV that goes into the grid and the more investment that's required, that becomes a very sort of clear balancing challenge over the next 5 to 10 years. But actually, if we look at the revenues or the selling to the grid argument, this example here is around what we call behind the meter. So it's on a premise. So it's either on the roof of a building or within an actual premise itself, within the boundary. Smaller domestic PV is generally what we call deemed export. So it's given a kind of notional figure. The larger stuff will be what we call normal sort of metered export. Assuming normal market prices, bearing in mind the energy price is at its highest rate for about 18 years at the moment. For every kilowatt hour of solar you generate from your roof, you will generally offset a kilowatt hour that's priced between 12 and 16 pence a kilowatt hour. So that would generally gives you your benefit. What I'm drawing from the solar panels, I'm not paying from the grid. about 18, 24 months ago, the government introduced what was called the SEG. So the SEG is it's a smart export guarantee. So it basically says that for every kilowatt hour of electricity that's sold back to the grid, the supplier has to give a value no less than zero. So there isn't a fixed export tariff anymore. This is a snapshot on the right of 4 suppliers I just pulled off as an example, averaging about 5.5p. So fundamentally, there becomes a material risk to the cost benefit the more you export, because instead of avoiding 12 to 16p, you're now getting paid 5.5p, which of course you want to maximize the amount of electricity you're using, which is why most behind the meter systems, roof mounted systems, are now sized to not export, because it limits the amount of risk that the local distributor will refuse the package, but it also means that it limits the amount that you're getting at a much lower value. Much larger systems can get what are called PPA prices, but I think in most instances, what we're talking about here, it's largely based on that SEG, that export price. That 5.5p could go to 8p. It could fundamentally go to 0.1p. You don't actually fix that position. You just simply accept the tariff rate at the time. Slightly different on what we call grid connected. So imagine you have a very large piece of land. It's not directly connected to a building you own, but you would like to build a ground-mounted PV system, and that would be connected to the actual network itself. We're running 3 projects at the moment for 3 of our council clients, and they're all looking at major investment in big, large-scale ground-mount PV systems on land. Generally speaking, and looking at the right hand side, you'll have to excuse me, this is in euros per megawatt hour. I didn't have the time to take it apart, convert it and put it back into pounds, but suffice to say the average rate available for what's called a PPA is around the 50 euros a megawatt mark. And generally speaking, when you're doing a large scale grid connected system, you would look to attract investors or off takers. So organizations who would be prepared to sign up to anywhere from a 5 to 25 year contract to take a percentage of that big solar farm, and they would agree to do so for a price. In normal market conditions, that price would be around that 50 euro a megawatt hour mark. There's lots of appetite for that at the moment. For every megawatt of solar that's generated, you get what's called a REGO. A REGO is the certification scheme that says that electricity has come from a certified renewable electricity source. That REGO holds a value, and that can be sold as well, although typically you would sell it with the energy to avoid any element of greenwashing. Another illustration and point of note is that lots of council are also exploring what are called virtual PPAs. I have my council offices over here. I have my land over here. I can't actually physically private wire that energy. So therefore, what I will do is I will send that energy to the grid, and then I will use a supplier to buy that energy back. Because I'm selling it to the supplier, I can agree what I sell it to the supplier to, and in turn, what I then buy it back to myself for. In the majority of instances, both behind the meter and grid connected, the value of export will vary according to the market. We've just recently struck a deal last week for 9.8p, but that's fundamentally because the wholesale market is the highest level in 18 years. If we were striking that agreement in the middle of lockdown last year, we would have been striking that at about 4p. So there are the less energy that you can actually use from a solar PV system, the better, the worse it is, because fundamentally you're exposing yourselves to what is inherently a volatile and commoditized market. So to close and just to give you some conclusions, excuse my animation. I'm not very good at this on Excel. PowerPoint, sorry. Hydrogen it needs to be a big part of that renewable strategy. Thinking and considering and keeping an eye on the hydrogen sector needs to be something that's applied into an overall renewable strategy. Renewables is no longer just about electricity, it's also about gas. We do have a very much a mass market adoption of solar, battery and EV charging. They will move at speed. The solar market will probably move at a slower speed now. It's very mature, but the actual battery and EV charging sector will move at such a pace that you've got to be careful as to what investments that you take in that. we only got to look at the increase in the amount of charging capacity that you can get at the moment. Low carbon heating also needs to play into that renewable energy piece as well, around solar thermal, storage heaters, and heat batteries, which is becoming a new big thing as well. And there are various schemes that are available for the electrification of heat load. So again, that needs to play in as part of that overall renewable strategy. Again, for hydrogen, it's not necessarily a risk right now, but it's something that needs to be considered around a renewable strategy going forward. In terms of solar battery and EV charging, I think EV will start to compete with hydrogen as we move into the 2030s. So again, whilst EV is a big thing at the moment, I think it needs to be measured in comparison to other opportunities. In terms of low carbon heating, it becomes very expensive when you're not building something brand new. And that is the fundamental challenge. It's decarbonising our existing building stock, both domestic and non-domestic. And then very much around the electrification of heat load. The government would like us all to electrify our heat load, but there is a significant amount of insufficient funding. I think the impact of COVID has not yet been realised fully, and I think that will have a much bigger impact as well. I must admit, having read the increase in national insurance payments that was announced today, you can see that actually there is a significant amount of funding, so some of that money needs to come from somewhere. And then lastly but least, I think around the whole renewable piece, the carrot and the stick hasn't worked. There has been a minor adoption in a lot of renewable measures, but actually a lot of people haven't. So therefore, in order to reach our net zero target, the government has to take away the carrot and the stick. High price equals people doing things, and actually mandate people to do things. So minimum standards around everything from energy utilization, efficiency of gas boilers, the whole spectrum will largely come under the target of a minimum standard at some form going forward. So hopefully that's been insightful. I'm not sure whether we do questions now or at the end, but I'll pass you back. Thank you. If I can work out how to stop sharing my screen as well. Oh. Sorry, you bear with me. I'm trying to stop how to share. Oh, there we go.
There we are. Thank you, Gavin. Wow. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you very much. No, we will take questions now rather than at the end, so that everyone's got, if people got questions and such fresh in their mind or comments to make, they can do so now. So are there any questions or comments for Gavin, please? I could see Gerald, your hand up.
Yeah. Thank you. Mike, okay? Sound okay?
Yeah, absolutely fine.
Good. Yeah, thanks for that, Gavin. Just a question. When you were talking about the Port of Dover and solar, are you saying that solar nationally will kind of reach its saturation point in the not too distant future, when there's actually enough solar energy around, because there are the alternatives? And obviously solar doesn't work very well at night, so you need an alternative anyway.
Yeah, I think solar has got a long way to go before it reaches a saturation point. I think the challenge is that, it's back to my point that historically you had very big generators in the country and they would provide all that power into the grids. And now all of a sudden you've got solar generating in lots of different places. You've got EV chargers happening at different times. The local grids or the local distribution network operators, they're struggling to invest or put sufficient investment into their grids in order to balance everything, because of course the minute you stop balancing the in and the out, you have problems. So I think what we will find is, over at least the next 5 to 10 years, is that in certain areas of the country there will be challenges as to the growth of PV, purely because those localized grids will struggle. So, the Port of Dover have got a lovely 1.1 megawatt PV system. It's very nice, but they can't export to grid beyond a very small amount. If I go 30 miles down the road from there, that may be a different situation. So I think it will largely become a localized issue, as a lot of those networks struggle to invest in their networks.
Can I ask a follow-up quick question, Amy? You're muted, Amy.
Sorry, my daughter came in and kept talking to me. Yes, you may ask follow-up questions on this.
What is the life of solar panels? I always understood it was like 25 years. Just another general question.
Yeah. So generally, you will get a warranty for 25 years on a panel. Those panels will degrade every year. So they will be around 60% efficient by year 25. You'd probably get another 10 years out of that. So I'd say 35 years. The issue, I suppose, is, and this is the one thing that's often not spoken of, is you have inverters. So those inverters are there to take the power coming through the panels into usable power into the network or into the site. Those inverters generally have to be switched out every 12 years. So when you're looking at the life cycle of solar PV, you may think, I put it in, I wash it every now and again, and I leave it for 25 years. But actually, there are other inherent costs that will come at about year 20, year 12, and year 25 as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. Next is John Somerville.
Hello there. Just on the last point, I'm pretty sure our panels have an 80% output guarantee for 25 years. Just jumping in there, so I can't speak for all panels, but I know ours have an 80% guarantee.
No, that's fine. Just a point. You can get performance ratio guarantees. So if a kilowatt hits the panel, it won't necessarily give you a whole kilowatt. It will give you a performance ratio performance. So basically what it was, if 1 kilowatt hits the system, dependent on the amount of wires or the inverters, you may only get 94% out of that. So what you might have is a performance ratio guarantee, possibly, because I think a lot of panel manufacturers do that as well. But sorry, carry on.
Okay. Well, I guess another question I had is, I guess I can see why sort of you're extolling the virtues of hydrogen. I guess one of the challenges I can see there is that at the moment that is most definitely not zero carbon, and essentially there's a stage of not doing very much for about 5 or 10 years if we're going to rely on that. I don't know if you'd agree with that statement or not.
Yeah, no, to be honest, hydrogen is a long way away. Leeds HS2, I think it is a great example to read up on of a localized hydrogen product. In effect, you've got two types of hydrogen. You've got blue and green. So fundamentally, green hydrogen is hydrogen that be processed through a process that is supported by renewable electricity. Blue hydrogen is not necessarily got that much legs in it as well. I think that the challenge is that in order to decarbonize the gas grid or the gas market, you either have to electrify heat, of which that's a significant challenge. Replacing boilers, retrofitting heat pumps is incredibly difficult in a lot of cases. And there is a significant skills gap to fitting heat pumps, for example. Biomethane is the only other stopgap in the short term, and biomethane plants can be rather smelly. Whilst we don't exactly have a real problem with population density, it's in some parts the amount of biomethane that would need to be produced to kind of plug that gap is significant, and actually the cost of doing so is quite extreme as well. So it needs to be supported. So I think the next 5 to 10 years is a mixture of electrification of heat where possible, possibly the domestic new build sector, although I think 2025 is ambitious. It's slow increases in biomethane, but I think as you get into the 2030s, I think hydrogen will have its day, is my personal view. I may be wrong, of course, but I think it's one of those things that if we can get the process right for good, clean, green hydrogen, then actually it becomes a very viable mix into the grid. We can only put 0.1% into the grid at the moment because some of the old iron mains don't exactly like hydrogen. So, I think once all those things have done, the stop gaps, and also because the government has only recently announced the policy but hasn't firmly cemented some of the measures within it, I think it's going to have its day eventually. But I think if this is going on YouTube, I'll probably be reminded of this in 10 years, I imagine, by colleagues. But I think it's there, but it's not there yet.
I guess what I was getting at there, which is, I guess, less a question for you and more a point for this forum, is I think this is actually the renewable energy one, but actually probably heat pumps and retrofit are, and I have an interest here because I've spent 5 years retrofitting our house down to sort of pretty big carbon reduction. And heat pump is the one thing I've not been able to justify despite being heat pump ready, because it would cost 4 times the price of a boiler and not save any money. It would save quite a lot of carbon. So the incentives don't feel aligned in heat pumps with zero carbon. And I guess that builds on your points around skills as well. I also noticed in your slide that I think came from one of the power companies. It looked like they'd assumed no significant drop in the cost of heat pumps to 2050. So I think they said 22 million installations and however many billion. And numbers like that will always scare people, and I guess they have an interest as well, being a energy company. But given with PV, it's semiconductors are different to electromagnetic motors, but there is a gain to be got there through the economies of scale and skilling up people and sort of retrofitting houses. And that feels like the thing that is being missed in the strategy at the moment. And that may be beyond North Arts Council, but that I guess that would be my sort of big sort of question. What can we do there, I guess, at this level?
Right, so Gavin, do you want to come back on that, or can I move to Steve, who's got his hand up?
I'll come back on that. I think me and John could probably talk for hours, I think, at this rate. We'll move on to the next one, and then I'll come back to you, John.
So Steve, you're next.
Okay, I mean, a couple of points. We've touched on one already, in that I mean, hydrogen depends on generation of large amounts of hydrogen, and it needs to be green hydrogen, and it's going to have substantial carbon benefits. That presumably has significant grid impacts itself, in that essentially generation of green hydrogen is an electrical process that's powered by renewable electricity. So that presumably is a substantial issue. And I think, as John has just, the point John has made is, at local level, there's not much we can do in the foreseeable future about move to hydrogen. In terms of PV, you didn't talk about the role of, or if you did, I might have missed it, you didn't talk about the role of battery storage, which is something that more PV systems seem to be moving towards. So how does that play?
Yeah, so I have a very personal pessimistic view on the role of battery storage at the current moment. The cost of batteries are still reasonably expensive. Within a battery storage device, you have a cycling warranty. So the warranty is based on cycles. So a cycle is in and out, so that you generally lose some energy when you put it in, you lose some when you take it out again. Every time we've attempted to commercialize battery storage for clients, we have significantly struggled to do so, because there's just not been the underlying market signals or the required sort of investment in order to do so. And actually, in most cases, when we've been looking at solar PV, most of our clients, generally speaking, have tended to soak up or use the bulk of the solar PV, because therefore we've designed the system accordingly in order to get the required consents. So I'm still of the firm belief at the moment that a well-sized PV system without battery is a much more, or sort of a more prudent economic decision than a oversized PV system with a battery. I suppose from a domestic level, you could argue that that actually most people aren't generally at home at the moment, or at least pre-COVID, I suppose, wouldn't have been. So actually, when solar's generating, people aren't generally at home. But I think given the size of most domestic solar PV systems, I think if you actually really dug beneath it and actually looked at the economics of it, I think in a lot of cases, you probably would actually just push the battery to the side, because the economics of the investment don't particularly stack up. And I think battery has got a long way to go. I also think to me, there are certain ethical issues around the rare earth minerals and where they're sourced from that go into battery production. And I think there's a lot of work to be done on battery before it becomes something that I believe is truly commercially viable. So we've not yet commercialized a single installation in the last 3 to 5 years.
But large-scale solar generation surely needs some sort of energy storage, doesn't it? In a country where, for much of the year, daylight is relatively limited.
No, to be fair, I think if you were doing a large-scale solar farm, you would be doing 5 to 10 megawatts, possibly 20 megawatts. I know there are some upwards of 50 megawatts. The City of London have just signed a big one for that. That over the course of an average day or an average month makes a small dent in the overall market. There's also a significant decline in the amount of coal generation because coal is a very naughty fuel that's never talked of now. And actually, we'll see that there's probably going to be a decline in gas-fired generation as well. So I actually think with all the things going in at the moment, I don't think we'll ever get to a point where someone says we can't put solar on because we don't need any energy. There will always be a viable route to market for large-scale solar to sell into the grid. And to be fair, there are large, big solar battery farms that are run grid connected by other third parties and National Grid. I think the role that those large grid connected PV systems battery systems, play is probably what will be the balancing. I still feel that the economics of even battery connected to a large scale ground mount PV system in a big field where you are, I just think when you run the economics of it and the numbers, you look at the cycling, there will always be something that just doesn't quite stack up at the moment, is my personal view.
Thank you, Gavin. I've got a question from Christine in the chat, which I'm just going to read out. And it's basically asking, what can local councils play, or what role can local councils play in building smart houses, for example, in local plans? I think, Steve, this might be something you could possibly answer with Gavin, or Gavin could answer himself.
I'm happy to cover it, but if Steve would like to add anything, I'm happy.
Yeah, that'd be good.
I'll suggest Gavin does it and I'll add anything.
Perfect. Okay, Gavin, you can.
Sorry, just muted myself then. I think the connectivity of smart homes is becoming ever more pertinent with things like Google Nest and the various other controls that you can put in play. I think for me, a smart home will come down to smart metering, and it will come down to smart gas controls. So as a general view, as a domestic householder, all suppliers under legislation should be looking to fit smart meters. That rollout is ever increasingly ongoing. We've just seen a new, what we call SMETS 2, which is a new type of meter. So suppliers should be actively, and I know Bulb is my supplier, and they're consistently emailing me trying to fit a smart meter at my house every week. So I think the role of a council could play is largely in helping domestic householders, domestic users understand the fact that smart meters are useful. I think smart water is a big example of this. A lot of people refuse to have water meters because in some cases when they got their water meter fitted, their costs went up. It's very different with electricity and gas because actually at some point in a year, you're always going to have an actual reading. So if you're underestimated, you will always get caught eventually. So a smart meter makes a very sensible decision. And I think it's important that domestic householders actually utilize the data from the smart meter to help them understand where they're using energy and how they're using energy. I think when it comes to gas and gas utilization, central heating, I think something like a Google Nest or another form of kind of sort of application that can allow domestic users to kind of control their heat use and be perhaps more reactive rather than having to stand at a thermostat changing things. I would argue if you actually looked at the behavior and the timer planning of 1,000 domestic households in terms of how they set their thermostats, their temperatures and their timers, I can guarantee you could probably save about 30 to 40% on gas because most people are notoriously bad at doing so. I think that becomes an education campaign. I think it may possibly become something where the council may choose to fund something like Google Nest or an equivalent. It's just the first one I can think of. So I think that's probably my thoughts on that one.
Thank you, Gavin. Steve, was there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that we have to recognise is the council's ability to insist on things via the planning system is nowhere near what we would like it to be. The government places some real constraints on what we can insist on in terms of new build. It doesn't enable us to go as far as we would like. We do have some more flexibility where we have control with the landowner and of making people, increasing awareness and helping people figure out how they can help themselves for these things. Because I think there's quite a lot of confusion. There are people who understand this and spend a lot of time thinking about it. There's then a small bunch of people who are not interested. And there's a large number of people in the middle who will do it if it's made easier for them at the present time. And I think we can help to communicate to some of those people how they can do things that will help themselves as well as helping the community and the country.
Brilliant. Thank you, Steve. Right. I'm thinking of time. Any more questions for Gavin? I can't see anybody waving and I can't see any hands up. Okay. Gavin, thank you so much. That was really informative. This has been this is very much an educational panel this evening.
That's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Right. Next, we have West Suffolk Council Solar Energy Generation Scheme presentation. And we have Luke Simpkin from West Suffolk Council to present their solar energy generation schemes. Luke, can I pass over to you?
Yeah, sure. I think someone's going to share the slides for me. Excellent. Great.
Yeah.
So first of all, thanks very much for inviting us to talk. And I think it's really fortunate that this presentation follows Gavin's, because luckily he has outlined most of the kind of technicalities, as it were, that underpin the schemes that I'm going to talk about. This is a relatively high-level presentation, and that's because I'm jumping in to speak this evening after one of my colleagues has been pulled away who would usually manage these types of projects. So I've purposely kept it rather high level. Next slide, please. So where is West Suffolk? So relative to Cambridge, we're the other side in comparison to you guys. We're a relatively rural county or local authority, should I say, with most of our population distributed between 5 relatively small towns. And in total, we have about 41,000 properties within our district. Next slide. So Andy, the chap who was going to talk today, put in this really interesting graphic, which basically looks at the conversations around climate emergencies and the number of organisations declaring climate emergencies. And as you can see, until relatively recently, those terms weren't really used. They weren't really in the public eye. And although there was activity happening, those particular terms weren't kind of common conversation. But following a few significant events surrounding protests, the work that Greta has been doing, and a special report on global warming by the IPCC, the kind of conversations around climate, what a climate emergency is, have rapidly increased. And you can see the number of organisations there that have declared climate emergencies have rapidly increased in a relatively short time. Next slide, please. Having said that, West Suffolk have had a demonstrated history of proactive environmental campaigning and also environmental works. So back in the day when we were previously 2 split authorities, West Suffolk, or sorry, St Edmundsbury had their first climate action plan in '98. That was followed by ISO 14001 accreditation. More recently, so in 2015, we had a community energy plan launched, and also we launched our Topham solar farm. Then even more recently still, we declared climate and biodiversity emergencies, which I'm sure many local authorities, or I know many local authorities have done. And over in West Suffolk, we've declared one as a local authority, but we also have a Suffolk climate emergency. And both of those declarations are supported with climate change action plans. Next slide, please. So what underpins the work that the team are doing? So we have a community energy plan, which, as the slide says, it lays the groundwork for renewable energy investment. It's basically a pot of money that we can draw from to invest in local energy schemes. So instead of making a pot of money become available and then implementing a few schemes and then saying, right, okay, we've done our job, we've met our targets, what we've done is made that a sustainable source of funding. So savings generated and income generated by the renewable energy schemes that we have invested in basically refund the capital expenditure. So we're able to draw on that pot over and over again. And basically, once the initial systems were in place, they've effectively snowballed. So after putting solar PV on all of our office, depot, and other leisure centre buildings, we've now reached out to local businesses as well. So we've learned how solar system or solar panels work within our own property, and then use the savings from that to reinvest into local community systems as well. And obviously the benefits of that is that by owning that system, there's then a consistent and stable income for the authority, which then can be reinvested into other services within the authority. These slides have been shared with Alice, but I'm happy to share again later. But there is a link at the bottom of this slide, which contains our community energy plan. And that basically underpins how this pot of money, how this funding came about, basically. Next slide, please. So one of the most significant projects which our team has undertaken was the creation and then later purchase of a solar farm. So it's a 12.5 megawatt solar farm, which is just up the road from the main town within our district. Back in 2015, we were approached by a landowner and also a solar developer, and they saw the possibility of putting a solar farm on some, it wasn't farmland, but it was just kind of low quality land that wasn't really being used for anything at the time. What we said to the organisation was, if you can effectively build the solar farm on that plot of land by a specific deadline, so whilst renewable obligation certificates were still being issued, then the council would then later purchase that solar farm and the company who produced it, and then we would own that solar farm and obviously own the organisation that put the solar farm together. And because of that structure, we then kind of mitigated any legal and also financial risks, because all of that sat with the company who was building the solar farm. So for example, if the council did it in-house and then for whatever reason were to miss that ROC's deadline, there would then be an absolute shift in the way that financial model worked, or might not have worked back when this was happening. So by having an external organisation do it for us, they took on the risks, and then once they had confirmed that they had got the ROCs, we were then able to effectively purchase that company and the ROCs that went with the solar farm. And as it says on the bottom there, we basically hived off that firm, so basically moved it, purchased it and moved it within what was at the time Forest Heath District Council. We have now merged to create West Suffolk Council, so basically two authorities have combined. Next slide, please. So a few stats on the solar farm here. So there's just under 50,000 panels on 17.5 acre site, which prevents 5,000 tons of carbon dioxide from being released into the atmosphere. And you can run 3,000 homes from it and 1,500 vehicles. And in 2021, it produced just under 12,000 megawatt hours of electricity, which was worth 1.31 million to the council. And as you can see on the graph, May just gone was our best performing month. And that is also reflected in all of our smaller scale solar systems as well. So you can see that there is a significant seasonal variation there, with most of the generation and subsequent income to the council being produced from April to June and also July as well sometimes. Next slide, please. So in terms of figures then, so Andy has produced a small table here which just outlines the revenue and the net benefit to the council. So as you can see, we've benefited from an increase in the price that we've been able to achieve for the exported electricity. So you can see the net benefits rising from about 308,000 to 600,000 from 2016-17 to 2019-2020. There is a slight decrease in the revenue generated by the system in the last year, and that was because a little part of the, or relatively significant part of the solar farm was down for a short period, and that was due to site flooding. So basically one of the transformers was knocked offline because part of the site flooded. So that's why there's a small drop in revenue there. And as Gavin was outlining, obviously there is a risk here that there is fluctuations to the wholesale electricity price, but generally speaking, over time it has increased, and therefore our net benefit has increased over time. And the way the electricity is sold from this particular site is it goes through an auction, and there's a couple of details on the next slide. But basically we sell the electricity and the rocks together, but you can sell them separately if you so wish to. Next slide. So in terms of operational costs, so Andy has indicated a few operational costs here, so just costs to be aware of when you're operating a site of this size. The operational maintenance cost there is probably slightly lower than some of the costs that other authorities might be able to achieve. And that's primarily because of the company that we purchased alongside the solar farm, which is a small local company who know the site really well, and they do all of the maintenance for us rather than a larger kind of conglomerate coming in who's perhaps unfamiliar with the site. We have people on site all the while, and if for whatever reason a panel is damaged, they can just nip out. It's literally just across the field from where they are and replace the panel. And for us, that is a relatively frequent occurrence just because we are located near an RSPB site. And interestingly, what we have is birds flying over the site, and they tend to drop rocks onto the panels. And I'm not sure if it's something to do with the birds thinking it's a lake or something and potentially dropping rocks to see if it's water. But yeah, having a small organization who does the operational and maintenance side of things for us on site does allow us to save quite a bit. So as I was mentioning earlier, in terms of actually selling the energy, so it's currently sold via a PPA, which Gavin was outlining just a little while ago, and that goes via an auction. So I think our prices are locked in. I believe it's every year. And that power is purchased via whoever gives us the best price at that particular time. There are options and there are discussions internally about making better use, or at least getting a higher return for that energy. And again, following Gavin's presentation about the various types of methods you can sell energy, one of them is sleeving. So basically using an energy company to buy the energy from us and then resupply it back to our buildings, or also signing a long-term PPA with a third party. So just up the road from our particular site, there is a significant American Air Force base. So there is potential there, should the discussions, go in the right direction, that they could sign a contract with us, and then we could have a direct pipeline to sell the energy straight to the site, which might give us a better return. But as it stands at the moment, we're using an auction via a PPA. Next slide, please. So that's the large scale. Now on to slightly smaller scales, and perhaps one that is slightly more unique to West Suffolk. So using that community energy fund, which I highlighted earlier, we've invested 3.1 million in smaller scale rooftop mounted systems. So when this slide was produced, we had 60 sites with a capacity of 3.5 megawatts. That's now gone up to about 65 or so. And following a recent marketing campaign, we've now got another 40 businesses, 40 local businesses who are interested to sign up to this scheme. And basically what happens is West Suffolk Council will fully fund, we own, we project manage and install solar PV onto local businesses' roofs. The size of the systems does vary quite a lot. So we have tiny systems which are about 6 kilowatt peak, all the way up to one organization who has 2 500 megawatt peak systems with us. And as we were talking about earlier, we used to make use of the feed-in tariff. So we could effectively excuse the term, but just plaster panels all over a building, obviously where we could, because the feed-in tariff would help make the business case for it. But now, because the feed-in tariff has been pulled, we have to better size the systems to the demand of the business's roof who we're going to put the panels on. And then what happens is any energy which is generated from the panels is then sold to the business at a rate which is below the current market rate which they're paying. So not only do we get an income from the panels and potentially an income from any export where applicable, but we also are enabling the local businesses around us to save on their electricity bills, and then they can also claim that they're using a renewable energy supply. The kind of slight complication with this setup is that local businesses will still need a grid supply, because obviously in the winter the output from the panels is considerably lower than the summer. So although in the summer the systems will more than likely supply more than enough energy to our customers, in the winter there will be a requirement to lean on the grid for any of their demand. There was a conversation earlier this evening about the use of battery storage, but we have reached similar conclusions at this stage. So we don't have battery storage on any of our sites, but we do have customers who are interested in it. So there are conversations happening, but as it stands at the moment, we don't have battery storage on these particular sites. Let's have a look. And each of our sites is assessed, so we have to meet internal financial kind of criteria, qualification criteria as it is. So on average, we get an IRR of 10.91%, and that's generating an income of 300,000. And that 300,000 is based on the energy which we're selling to all of our customer businesses. And that's also linked to CPI. So after they've had an install with us for a couple of years, we'll then link their tariff to CPI, and obviously that will just increase over time. So the amount that we're getting from the panels is increasing, although that is in the face of the panels kind of degrading over time as well. And as you can see on the right-hand side, there's just a graph of the amount of solar that's gone in over time. So obviously in 2021, there has been a bit of a dip, which is understandable. But following our recent marketing, there is a lot of interest for this type of scheme. And I think reflecting on the previous slide with regards to awareness for environmental matters, and also the discussions around becoming net zero, that's really been reflected in the numbers that we're seeing come back from our marketing campaign. So there is a lot of interest in this at the moment. Next slide, please. So we use the same sort of model for other technologies as well. So we have implemented ground source heat pumps at a few different sites. So we've added more since this slide was produced. And also we've used the same model again for a biomass boiler at a horse racing museum, which is just up the road from us. And again, similarly for LED lighting project. So we found that this model works really well for solar, and now we're rolling it out into other technologies. We've also been awarded money under the public sector decarbonisation scheme, which again involves more solar PV using the model we've just outlined previously. But also this does include battery storage, but this is kind of static, large-scale storage, not the type of storage that would be associated with the smaller solar for business schemes or installations, which was on the previous slide. And that is primarily to act as a UPS, so an uninterrupted power supply, and also it provides grid services as well. So it's not necessarily about shifting peak energy generation from solar to periods of less generation. This is about supporting the grid using ancillary services. And of course, all of the schemes make financial and carbon savings, which help the council to reach its goal of becoming net zero by 2030. Next slide, please. So yeah, as I was saying, obviously there is a reputational benefit there. we've got a lot of good news stories come out of the back of our Solar for Business scheme, and I think using those in marketing has really helped. And a lot of businesses also talk about the solar panels that they've had installed on their buildings as well, and they use that in their marketing and also to maintain or uphold their reputation amongst their communities which they're networking in. As I mentioned before, it's helping us reach our goals of becoming net zero by 2030. So although strictly speaking, we can't count installations that are supported by either ROC or FIT or SEG, which are the government support schemes for solar, any new installations aren't making use of those schemes, and therefore they can be used to net our other emissions. And one of the previous authorities which combined to make West Suffolk Council was net zero, and they had claimed that a few years ago actually. So the piece of work for us to do next is to reassess our current portfolio and then look to see how that impacts or balances against our emissions from elsewhere to see if it will make the whole of West Suffolk Council net zero. Next slide, please. So in terms of next steps, again, like I was saying, we're pursuing the development of new solar farms. So we're currently looking at other pieces of land which aren't necessarily for agricultural use at the moment. It might be kind of waste ground or ground which is not very productive. And that's obviously because we recognize we don't want to be contributing to that battle, so to speak, between providing food and crops versus energy. And I think that's a really interesting area where rooftop mounted solar, particularly our Solar for Business sites, come into play, because they are making use of space which is underutilized, and that space on top of commercial rooftops isn't really being used for anything else. We will continue to generate renewable energy projects within West Suffolk. So again, using that Solar for Business model and other technologies. So that might be renewable heat, for example, where I highlighted the use of biomass boilers and heat pumps. Internally, we had a environment and climate change task force who were the kind of driving body for this declaration. And then following that, we have made an environmental management group, which is an internal group of officers who are actually working through the business cases which sit behind each of the actions that were outputted by that climate change task force. And that's reflected in the final point. Next slide, please. So yeah, sorry, it's a slightly higher level than perhaps what was anticipated, but I put Andrew, my colleague's details on the final slide here. And by all means, he'll be happy to talk through any of the facts and figures, perhaps the business cases behind some of our installations. So by all means, I'd encourage you to reach out, and you can find more information about the schemes that the council is currently undertaking on our website, and also our environmental statement, which basically outlines the journey to net zero emissions and all the various projects that we're currently undertaking. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, Luke. Right. Do we have any questions or comments for Luke after that presentation? Wow, I've got some hands up. Right, I'm going to go with Councillor Keith Hoskins, because this is his first question of the night.
Thank you very much. First ones are always the good ones, though. I just want to say what a really good and impressive presentation that was, and just wondering whether we can have a copy of it. I know our own commercial department have been struggling for a couple of years now to try and identify sites and schemes where we could do something similar with solar panels, and I'm sure this presentation could be of some benefit to them, and they would want to follow it up. So if we could get a copy of that, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. I've shared the presentation with Alice, so by all means share that, Alice. And we've helped other local authorities well in terms of the kind of agreements and the documentation which sits behind all of this, because we have to have power purchase agreements in place and also leases with the premises that we have the panels on. So there is a lot more detail which sits behind this presentation, and I'm sure Andy would be more than happy to have, you know, further conversations offline as to the kind of mechanics which sit behind all of this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Next is Councillor Steve Jarvis.
Thanks. Yeah, that was a very, very interesting, impressive presentation. You've clearly achieved a great deal. A couple of questions. One, the indication has been given to me when people are looking at large-scale PV installations is that the ability to make a substantial connection to the grid can be a real issue. In that I understand that if you're in the wrong place, then the cost of a grid connection can essentially wipe out any return from the scheme. So were you just fortunate, or did you find a way around that? And I guess the other question is around when you're funding, when you're working with businesses, with your business community energy scheme, and is that something that the council funds from its own resources, or does it borrow money to do that? I mean, presumably there's a community benefit, so the latest SIPSA and government rules would presumably allow you to do that if you could claim you were providing benefit to local business, or do you fund it from resources you have to have?
Certainly. So in terms of the grid connection, that is something which is dictated to us by UKPN in our particular area. Most of the time we don't have any issues, and I think we've been probably quite lucky in that respect. As I was saying, for systems now, we do have to size them more appropriately to the consumption that the business has. So we used to just make use of the feed-in tariff, and you could literally put on the biggest system you could, and the benefits from that were vast. Now we have to be a little bit more sensible in how we size the system, and it means that we're not spending so much on the system as well. So there is, some practical elements there. There are a couple of areas where we know there are difficulties. And so by using an appropriately sized system, you are avoiding any export.
Yeah.
Where there is sometimes a situation where there is export, then as Gavin was saying earlier, you can just effectively program the system to just dial down the output. And yes, there is an implication on then the amount that we can sell to the business, but generally speaking, it's all sized so that the business is pretty much consuming everything which is generated, and therefore we don't have that risk of not being able to export, should there be a grid constraint. I think on the same conversation, it's also worth highlighting we're currently moving into a peer-to-peer trading model as well. So if there are areas of export, what we can do is, instead of sending that out wide into the grid, is we can send it to a neighbouring premises who might not have solar PV, and therefore again we're getting around that whole export and grid kind of capacity issue, and then also helping out a neighbouring business who might not have the space for panels but yet can still benefit from the renewable energy, and again will benefit from selling it to them. That is a slightly more complicated model, but that's our next step. And that also has benefits for reinforcing the grid. And then in terms of the second question, so yes, we were using feed-in tariff in the early days, but that's because the systems were more expensive. You could argue FIT has done its job in that it's reduced the cost of the systems, so we don't need it. But in replacement of that, we have slightly increased the tariff which the businesses buy the electricity off of us at. So the newer installs are going in at a slightly higher tariff, but it's always below what the business can buy off of the grid. So even if it was still a couple of pennies below what they're buying, immediately, without any capital expenditure, they're saving straight away, and you've got a carbon saving. So it still works without government support, and we aren't using government support. It's all internal funding. It's just the more modern systems have a slightly higher selling price.
Thank you, Luke. Next we have, sorry, Steve, did you want to come back on that, or can I move on with the next questions?
I guess the only other question I'd be interested is, do you have does the council have a large team of people working on this, or is it something, I mean, presumably the income you generate funds the team that work on it, but have you had to hire 100 people to run this business?
No, so I mean, at the moment we have about 65 of the solar for business type sites, and then we've got solar PV on all of our buildings, depots and leisure centres. At the moment, it's mostly myself and my colleague Andrew who run this mini energy company, so to speak. There are conversations about who does all of the metering and the billing, because obviously as more sites go in, the amount of legwork and admin which sits behind it is rapidly increasing. So we could ask an external company to do the metering for us, or we could use the money that it's generating to get a technical role within the team.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you, Steve. Next, we've got Councillor Gerald Morris, followed by John Somerville. So, and then Roger Lovegrove, and then that's going to be it for questions, I think, for this section.
Thank you. Thank you. Luke, on one of the slides, it said IRR 10.91%. What does that mean? Is that something like return on investment or something?
Yeah, so forgive me because I'm not really a finance board, but that's one of the stipulations which we get from our finance team. So we have to meet a minimum return of investment to enable us to put the systems out there. And there's a whole host of modelling which sits behind that, based on estimations of future electricity price, the amount of energy that the system is going to generate, and then how much of that the customer business is going to purchase off of us.
So it's obviously a well, obviously solar's long-term investment anyway. So you'd see your money back in something like 9 years. On obviously it varies from place to place. And
yeah, I mean it does vary. Yeah, it does vary depending on what the host business does as well, and obviously the size of the system. We could back in the day put systems on businesses who weren't consuming loads. But now we do generally look for high consuming businesses. So sites which are mostly electrical based, have plenty of plant or equipment that's running most of the day. But yeah, if I can kind of leave the kind of finance questions to my colleague Andy, or you wanted to shoot him an email, by all means, and he'll.
No, it's fine. It's okay. It's pretty clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerald. Next, we've got John Somerville. You're on mute, John.
Yeah, hi there, Luke. It was a brilliant presentation, and it was really insightful to hear what's happening in West Suffolk. Well, my questions were around I guess, if you've done any due diligence around the interplay between different measures. So for example, if you put up a PV array that is wholly used by the company because you can't export, and then they get more efficient ovens, or they go from direct electric to heat pump, or something on those lines that just makes a massive cut in their energy usage. I guess that's so, yeah.
Yeah, so my colleague Andy does go into quite a lot of detail over future plans in terms of expansion, contraction, if they're going to move site. Sometimes what he likes to do, or the council does, is we will use a similar model to swap out any lighting that they might have. So if we kind of take control, so to speak, of any of the possible big changes which are going to happen, then we can kind of capture the benefit of that using the same model, and then it's not going to have an adverse effect on the solar panels. So the business will get improved LED lighting, improved lighting levels and reduced energy consumption. And then because we know that's a known to us, because we've effectively intervened, then we know what the impact that's going to have on the solar PV as well.
Well, that's so you take a sort of a holistic approach, and you take some easy wins along with the PV to stop them I guess it means you can capture more of the benefits and avoid getting shot in the foot later. So
exactly. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you.
No worries.
Thank you very much, John. Right, so I've got a question from Roger Lovegrove. Roger, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Just two very quick points. I'll be very quick. The Climate Change Task Force. That's a brilliant idea. Can please North Wales District Council have one? My second point is, and I think I've said this before, the Letchworth Leisure Centre has a brilliant roof for solar panels. It's a large roof, it's a very strong roof, and of course the power that it would generate could be used in the heating of the water and so forth. The leisure centres are quite high consumers of electricity. So the Letchworth Centre would be an ideal place to put some council-funded solar panels. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roger. Steve, you've put your hand up. Is that a legacy hand?
No, I just wanted to reply to Roger, really.
Perfect, thank you.
And so, yeah, the leisure centre roofs are all good places to put PV panels. We've done a piece of work to figure out what we can do on them, and we are in the process of moving towards doing that. And on some of the other council buildings as well, primarily with the idea of generating energy for use on site, as we've discussed this evening. I mean, what we haven't done is the kind of ambitious stuff that West Suffolk has done in terms of taking that out to businesses. We're only so far looking at doing it on council buildings, but it seems to me that we need to be exploring the way in which we can work with local businesses to do a great deal more of that. So, but in terms of the leisure centres, that's underway. It's underway in terms of planning it. It might happen next year. It might not be till the year after.
One of the problems is, I believe, that the building is rented by Stevenage Council, and so there's conflict about which financial authority should benefit from the generated power. That's where TTL came unstuck when it tried to put solar panels on the roof.
That's not entirely true. The leisure centre is run by a company called Stevenage Leisure Limited. It is true that there needs to be discussion with them about who pays for the installation and who gets the financial benefits from the energy savings. Clearly, we don't want a position where the council invests in the equipment and our contractor gets the benefits. So we need to sort those arrangements out. And clearly, I'm not going to talk about the details of that, but for all sorts of reasons. But there's nothing there that will stop us from doing it, I don't believe.
Marvellous, thank you, Steve. Right, I've got John. Is that a legacy hand, or did you want to come back for another question?
It was actually more a question for Steve, because I'd been meaning to mention the leisure centres as well. And I guess the question was, is it PV just for electrical usage, or are you repurposing the heating of those leisure centres so you can heat the pool water and maybe the shower water in the summer with the PV through heat pumps and things like that?
So, I mean, there's a significant question about how we decarbonise swimming pools, which at the moment use large amounts of gas. There are a number of projects which are heating municipal-sized swimming pools. There are things you can do on a small domestic swimming pool which are not practical on the ones of the size that we operate. There are certainly some pilot projects that are looking at a combination of heat pumps and PV in order to decarbonise pools. Stage one will be the PVs. The heat pumps will not be part of phase one, but we're clearly not going to get to zero carbon without essentially decarbonising any of those pools. They're probably the council's second largest carbon impact, and heat pumps and PV looks like the only feasible way of doing it to meet our 2030 deadline for the reasons that we heard earlier with Gavin's presentation. I don't think hydrogen has got a role to play in that, in the sort of timescale we want to do it in.
I guess it's a lovely application for heat pumps, because domestically you're fighting high water temperature for radiators, where with your pool at I don't know what pools are at these days, but yeah, it's cool essentially. So it would be lovely to see that in phase 2 and beyond.
Yep.
Thank you very much. And that's all the questions for Luke. Any more for any more? No? Okay. Right. Luke, thank you very much for that. That was absolutely fantastic. Thank you for coming and giving us that. We can pass on any other questions that come in. We can forward them on to you after this. Right. After that, I just would like to now bring in Diane Ketcher and Sue Lyons, and they're going to talk about the Green Festival that's coming up on the 11th of September and advise us of what's going to be happening there and what's going on. So Sue and Diane, are you there?
Yeah.
Hi. I'll hand over to you both now.
So you're muted. Sue, you're muted.
Sue, you're on mute.
Okay.
There we go.
Good. Okay. This idea came out of the Soil Association requesting members to get local groups together in the run-up to COP26. That's where this festival started its life, and it's taken on a life of its own, really trying to drill into local organisations to see what we've got locally and how we can make them better and think about the future being greener in Letchworth. We have deliberately tried not to get in touch with organisations who are far afield. There are lots of them in Hertfordshire itself, and that's a shame, but we are where we are in terms of the strength of Diane, Gillian, myself, and the work we've put in to get this off the ground for the 11th of September. There's plenty of information on Facebook, Instagram, and elsewhere, so I won't go into the details about stalls and who's there. It's fully booked. Love Letchworth have been supporting us all the way through. I think they're not used to sort of people like ourselves getting involved in something like this. I think they've been used to sort of professional organisations, so it's a bit of a shock to them. All I would say is that we have got some fantastic presentations on Saturday in the cafe part of the Broadway Gallery. These will be advertised on an A board outside and probably in the window of the gallery itself. Likewise on the Facebook pages, etc. But all about retrofitting from a young, very well qualified architect and passive house designer. Information on a whole range of things following that through to 3 p.m. We all need to be waste warriors, which is the waste reduction projects coordinator from Garden Organic, Rob Whitehouse. Diane, do you want to come in on the things that you've been doing in particular?
Me? Well,
your connection with the council in particular. On
yeah. Sorry, I haven't got much voice at the moment. Got a bad throat. Council. I've been emailing you, probably nagging you. Apologies for that. As to what you're going to bring to the stall. As far as I know, Rob Whitehouse has booked a separate stall for Waste Warriors. I'm presuming Louise Overington will be there as well. Is that Louise on IT support? I've only got the Lou bit. Anyway, then I heard Waste Aware were going to be on the council stall. Do any of you, Steve perhaps, know what the council are intending to do for their stall? Or in fact, have you asked for the Wind or the Arcade? That would give me a clue.
I don't know which site it is. There is one stall which is being primarily set up by the waste team, and then there is information about the council's climate change activities and about the 10,000 tree giveaway. And I think Alice can talk about what information is there. I don't know what information there is from the waste team. I don't know, Amy, if you're able to answer that.
Yeah, I was going to say I can chip in there. We'll be there with lots of food waste caddy bags to hand out to people to promote, the usage of. And again, as I said about the tree adopting, Alice has got some more information on that, and I can bring her in to talk about it if she doesn't mind. But yes, so we do have a stall, and we will be there, and Louise will be there, and I will be there. And hopefully we'll probably drag Steve over occasionally, and we'll have plenty of us around to talk, discuss, and just generally be a part of all this, because I'm very, very excited. Diane, I understand you are here poorly, so I really appreciate the fact that you've been able to come along, and you're losing your voice, and you need to protect that voice ready for the big festival. So, but yes, we do have a table, I believe, and we will be there.
I lost it yesterday. I haven't found it yet.
Bless you.
What I don't understand is if Rob Whitehouse has booked a Waste Warriors stall, and you have another stall for Waste Aware, or is it the same stall? If it's two stalls, are you side by side? Because he said he had booked a Waste Warriors stall to do his Waste Warriors stuff. And it's not.
I'm not entirely.
That's why I'm confused.
Oh, okay. Well, as far as where we have. Oh, yeah, Alice, are you there? Sorry.
I believe it's all the same stall, so I believe it's been booked under Waste Warriors, but that incorporates the council. So Louise Overington is going to be bringing the posters on behalf of our team, so that will all be posted at the same stall together.
Right, that's helpful. You've got an awful lot of different things to put on one stall. So do I take it that you've got a gazebo in the wind?
Yeah, I think they have.
I hope so.
Yes, I believe they have.
Oh, good.
That's my understanding.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Thank you, Sue. Sorry for the confusion, Diane.
It's all right. Thank you for clearing that up. Trees. Steve said he was going to bring. You've got a list of trees that you're going to give out. You want to give out to people, haven't you?
We've got a poster which Alice has produced, providing information about the tree giveaway scheme, and it will be possible for people to register their interest. Now, I mean, there's no trees yet. The trees don't arrive until the end of October, maybe early November. We might have trees, physical trees to give to people at the Baldock event, but it's too early in the year for them at the moment.
And have you contacted Tony Goodwin, because he said he'd link up with you by giving tree walks in Howard Park?
I don't think that's happened. Do you know that's happened, Alice? You heard anything about that?
I haven't.
No, I suspect that probably hasn't. We'll have to make some inquiries about that.
Yeah, because it would be useful. So if he has a list of the trees, maybe, and then he can make a point of telling people, what they are.
Yes, I mean many of the trees are small garden fruit trees, so I doubt he'll be able to point to examples of them in Howard Garden.
Yeah, that's something we can action then, I guess.
Yeah, we can follow that up.
Perfect. Okay. Right. So can we so finally have some details of date, time, and place?
Julie's got
a reminder.
Yes. How do you want it this year? It can't go in the chat. It's far too long. I mean, there's too much detail there. How would you like it posted to you?
Okay. Well, the information that we've got that's on Facebook. So I suppose I was just referring to, it starts at 10. It's on Saturday the 11th. It finishes at 5. Hi, Julie. Good to see you there. Welcome. And ends at 5, and is in the Wind and the Arcade in Letchworth.
Yeah.
And and so which means it's mostly undercover as well, which will be very nice. Did you have add anything else about anything specific that's happening that people can get involved in?
I think a lot of the stalls will invite involvement. We certainly hope that. And we're certainly making a very strong point of trying to involve children so that the adults can actually have their conversations, and likewise the children will be learning alongside at a level that's suitable for them. We've got storytelling in the storytelling tent in the corner of the Wind Gardens. That's Imagica Children's Theatre are doing 2 lots, and Chris Nicolay is doing 2 lots. So that should be absolutely fantastic for the kids. And between times, there will be a play organised with 2 adults in charge there, but parents are not invited. Sorry, parents must stay. It's not a children's sort of, leave your child and, it's not a creche. Yes. Okay.
Right, brilliant. That sounds fantastic. What a great idea. Okay, thank you, ladies. That was marvellous. Thank you for the information. I'm really excited to be for that to be happening soon. Next, we have. You can hang around to say, but you can go, especially you, Diane. Go to bed if you need to, if you're not well.
Yeah.
I believe next, if he's ready, we have John Webb with a presentation to give us. Are we ready to go? Is John here?
Sound check.
Oh, hello, John.
Hi, good, that works. In fact, it's Roger first, if that's okay, and then I'll come on. Speak soon.
Fantastic, thank you, John. So Roger, if you want to take the lead with that.
Yes, I'll try and make it short looking at the time. I'll miss some of it out, I think. But I'd like to take you all right back to the beginning of all this problem. We assume that the world is in the Goldilocks zone, that distance from the sun that enables water to be in liquid form. It may surprise you to know that we're not actually in that zone, we're slightly outside that zone. And if we had no atmosphere, all the surface water on the Earth would be frozen and we would have snowball Earth. It's thanks to our atmosphere and our greenhouse gases that we have liquid water and life. Greenhouse gases are very important, but what's even more important is the quantity of those greenhouse gases. Too little we freeze, too much we boil. And at present we've got far too much and we need to get back to pre-industrial levels. Now, unfortunately, even our government's green targets are not guaranteed to achieve this. And the council's main concern should be about their human populations and hence the need to aim at even tighter targets than the government are enforcing on you. So how do we do all this? Well, we need to consider alternative energy sources, reducing demand and capture and storage. And one alternative of all those has already been mentioned is hydrogen. Hydrogen, the most common element in the universe, could be used to replace natural gas. Unfortunately, there is very little free hydrogen on the planet, and it takes energy to extract it from the air. And how it's extracted is indicated by its color rating. Now, we've been asked to, I don't know why, been asked to explain these color ratings. There's brown hydrogen, pink hydrogen, gray, blue, green, and it's all the same hydrogen. It's just a different question about how the hydrogen is extracted from the air. Brown hydrogen, for example, is created through coal gasification. But the only ones we're really interested are blue and green. Blue uses natural gas, followed by, which is bad, but it's followed by carbon capture and storage, which means that blue hydrogen can be considered a low carbon source of hydrogen. Green hydrogen, has already been mentioned, is from renewables such as wind and solar, and is used in the electrolysis process to create hydrogen. So how could a town like Letchworth be changed over to hydrogen? Now, this is all sort of in the air stuff. The answer is it could, but there's some major problems. It would take a mammoth project to change all the gas boilers street by street in a town over, say, a couple of years. But since 2019, Worcester Bosch have been selling hydrogen-ready boilers. You can already buy a hydrogen-ready boiler. Don't recommend it, but it's possible. One could imagine a whole town like Letchworth switching over to these types of boilers over a couple of years, and over a couple of days, technicians come around and switch the whole lot over to hydrogen. That could happen. It's personally, as I think it's been said earlier, is not that likely. Alternative route, which has already been mentioned, is to mix natural gas with hydrogen. And there's an experiment going on at the moment in Kiel, where 100 homes are being fed with a mixture of natural gas and hydrogen. It takes a lot of energy to make energy. It's not only expensive to make, but it requires a lot of energy. And there's one showstopper in all this when it comes to the domestic heating market. If 1 unit of hydrogen, say, delivers 1 kilowatt hour of energy to your home, if it took 2 kilowatts of energy to make that hydrogen, why would you go to the bother of creating and then burning hydrogen when you could just send the electricity? Now, the sums at the moment would indicate that hydrogen just isn't on for that very simple reason. It takes more electricity to create it than the energy you get out when you burn it. So the whole thing is questionable. The one big advantage of hydrogen, however, is that you can store it. All you need is a metal container and you can pump tons of the stuff in and store it very easily. So for the transport way forward, this is more likely to be the way forward. And on the morning news this morning, the heir to the JCB fortune, who makes JCB diggers and so forth, his grandson has recently announced he's mounting 200 million for making green hydrogen for the transport businesses in the country. And he's hoping to expand that to billions in the long term. So people like that are working on investing. Private investors are actually putting money into creating these sorts of things. Just moving on to alternatives, you can already buy an electric boiler from Screwfix. If you go down the road into Screwfix, you can buy for around £500 to £900 an electric boiler, which you can just simply change over from your gas boiler. But there's a problem. One of the key problems is the amount of electricity an electric boiler needs. The largest one is only 14 kilowatts, and that requires 60 amps. Now, the average North Arts house has a 100 amp fuse. So to allocate 60 amps to an electric boiler is a bit of a showstopper. Electric kettle takes 13 amps. An immersion heater takes 13 amps. Charging a car would take 20 or 30 amps. So 100 amps just isn't sufficient if you're going to run an electric boiler. There is a simple solution. You have a 3-phase power supply. Every road in Hertfordshire has 3-phase up and down the road. All you've got to do is to connect to it, but it's a couple of thousand. One of our TTL members has tried this and he's been quoted a couple of thousand to connect a 3-phase power supply. Another alternative, of course, is heat pumps, which has been mentioned, a much more eco-friendly option, but they're around 10 times more expensive to install. But of course, they only use around about a third of the amount of electricity. So what can you as councillors do about all this? Probably the best thing you can do is reduce demand, facilitate and subsidise increased insulation and draft proofing of all existing housing stock. And on the news yesterday, the government announced an allocation of 270 million on something called the Green Heat Network Fund. Has anybody heard that? It was on the news yesterday. Perhaps not. The other thing you can do is ensure that the SPDs, the special planning documents imposing limits on what can be built in North Hertfordshire, which is happening right now because lots of estates are being planned in North Hertfordshire at the moment, should should only permit zero carbon homes to be built, not just from 2025. There's no reason whatsoever why you can't impose those requirements right now. With adequate insulation, an all-round airtight membrane, and a mechanical heat recovery system, such new dwellings only need around 3 kilowatts of heat. So why are we still building houses that need 15 to 30 kilowatts? I've almost finished. Such homes would not have a gas supply, there would be no chimneys and no bricks. And I'm getting a thing about bricks. Bricks are very poor insulators. Brick walls are not waterproof, and brick walls are not airtight. The only reason we use bricks is they're beautiful and we love their appearance. They don't even support your roof or your joists. The inner leaf supports your joists and your roof, not the external wall of a cavity wall. So we need to change society to think no bricks. And this leaves us with a fundamental dilemma, which is my last point. How do we make new estates as eco-friendly as Hartington Place? Those of you that are familiar with Letchworth will be familiar with Hartington Place. It's a very eco estate, but I hate to say it, it's not very pretty. It looks ugly. The first thing you see is all the recycling boxes and so forth. On the other hand, there are Cedar Gardens, which is only a couple of 100 yards away, which is all green, lovely brick, looks wonderful, but I'm willing to bet is really low, is nowhere near zero carbon. So there's an architectural challenge between building eco and building beautiful. And that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roger. Yes, well, you know, sometimes things can't be functional and pretty, or they could be both. We can aim for that. Would anyone like to come in with some comments or questions on Roger's presentation? I haven't got any hands up. Is there? Oh, Steve.
Well, I mean, I think Roger's is actually right. But, you know, so yes, it's important to decarbonise houses, and that switching from gas is an important part of that. But in terms of new houses, building houses that require much less or preferably even zero energy input is clearly the way to go. I think the difficulty that we all face is that even if all the houses that are possibly going to be built in North Herts over the next 10 or 20 years are built, 80% of the houses will be those that already exist. And how we retrofit those is not just a financial problem, but is a practical problem. And from the council's point of view, a lot of what we can do is about influencing and informing people. We don't have the resources, as I think Gavin said earlier. One of the issues is that there are the cost of retrofitting existing houses is billions, tens of billions, and there is a real issue about how the country as a whole is going to deal with that. So I think in the short term, I assume the most effective thing we can do is to make sure that new buildings are built to the best standards we can possibly insist on, and get across the message to those people who are able and willing to deal with decarbonising their existing house, how they can do it, the most cost-effective way they can do it, and why they can do it. But there's going to be many people who lack the resources to do that, and the government, if it's going to meet its targets, is going to have to think of a way of addressing that problem.
Thank you, Steve. Just coming back on that regarding retrofitting houses and changes with regards to how houses are built and developments are done. At the moment, we have an example of the buildings up at Campfield Way and Highover Road in Letchworth. They are now deemed to not be suitable regarding their heat retaining. It would cost so much to try and upgrade them to something that is of a standard that it is better that it is a new development is created, which would then make more homes and more eco-friendly homes, and also would be homes suitable for residents' needs who are currently living there. Anyway, I believe there's an article in the comment regarding that. But it is a process. It's something that is happening. So any other questions or comments? Sue, I can see you waving your hand.
Yes, 39 Ways to Save the Planet. They talked about a scheme called Energy Sprong. I think it may have been Danish or Dutch. And it was cladding houses in, I think it was Nottingham. And it was done in such a way that the tenants are going to continue to pay the same electricity bill, but they're a whole lot warmer. And part of their electricity bill pays back the company that's done the work. And it's a really interesting model. And if anybody can go back on Sounds and find that particular issue of 39 Ways to Save the Planet, it's well worth listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. I'm going to take a look at that. Is one of them going vegan? I think that's a big factor. Something that everyone wants to just step around. Well, lots of people want to step around, but I know it's something that's one of the best things that we can do. Any other questions or comments? I can't see anybody.
John wants to talk about carbon capture.
Yep. No, I've got John Webb coming up next with his. John, are you ready? You're on mute, John.
You're on, John.
You're on, John. You're now on mute again.
He's got a nice slideshow.
Can you hear me?
There we go. Yeah, we can hear you now, John.
Good.
Don't touch anything else.
Right. Good evening. Thank you, Chair. You all have heard the terms carbon capture, or acronyms CCS, CCUS, BECCS, or similar. These are widely used as if this approach were a panacea to banish emissions of greenhouse gases. The technologies are imagined to enable us to halt or even to reverse climate change if applied on an urgent, worldwide basis. These slides give an impression of some of the realities behind the general notion of carbon capture. Next slide, Sir Louis, please. Thank you. You will also hear people treating carbon capture as a novelty, recently invented in response to our rapidly changing climates. An irony of this is that for 5 decades, the fossil fuel industries have been using such technology for extracting oil and gas. Yet it is a novelty to think of carbon capture as a means of hopefully controlling the rate and duration of climate change. To achieve that, geologists propose that the carbon dioxide should be buried at least 1.5 kilometers deep for at least 10 millennia, 10,000 years. Next slide, please. Theoretically, and in small-scale experimentation, there are these 3 main ways of capturing carbon dioxide gas from industrial processes. I shall illustrate the principle of carbon capture in the third one, pre-combustion mode, since that is the only one that's nearing an industrial scale of operation. Next slide, please. Let's start at the lower left. Suppose that a large factory complex is burning a natural gas fuel, methane mainly. That makes its exhaust gases carbon intensive, that is mainly carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas. Next, at the lower mid-left, suppose next that these emissions are collected, cooled, and cleaned, ready for a chemical process. Then in the lower right corner, suppose that huge amounts of electrical energy are readily available from renewable sources. These are used for electrolysis to split water into hydrogen and oxygen, but forget about the oxygen for now. The hydrogen is collected and fed along with the factory's flue gas into a chemical process, which I'll explain in the next slide. That's up in the middle, the green tank-like thing. That isn't like that at all. nor is the funnel like that either. It's more like two factory complexes alongside the existing one. Then along the top, the methane resulting from that chemical process goes through a dryer to remove the water, and then it's compressed. Now, let's stop there. That is the stage at which it can either be utilized in some way or transported for permanent storage, known as sequestration. But in this example, and this is the top right-hand corner, it is fed into the factory's furnaces for combustion to power its own operation. Next slide, please. Here's the promised detailed graphic on the key chemical processes. There are actually two. In the first stage, the carbon dioxide is absorbed and then converted to methane and water. This is enabled by a metal oxide forming a carbonate compound, and then in the second stage, releasing the carbon as methane. So long as it is not too contaminated, that metal oxide, which can be calcium oxide, is reused within the process. It's just fed back into the first tank, as we think of it. Next slide, please. That sounds brilliant. A self-fueling factory, would you believe? Well, don't believe it. Each of these sub-operations may be illustrated in a chemical laboratory, but not at industrial scale. In practical and economic terms, the main snag is the vast amount of energy that's required to make all of this possible, as I said, at industrial scale of capacity and throughput rate, since if you stopped passing the gas through, the exhaust gas through, the factory would shut down automatically, normally, with severe consequences, and even more severe consequences if it didn't shut down. Next slide, please. Another huge overhead is the operation of storage of carbon dioxide deep underground, perhaps beneath the seabed in an aquifer of saline water, that's brine, in a layer typically shale. The carbon dioxide will slowly react with the rocks to form a stable, solid carbonate material, a mineral. Now, I'll address the left-hand map. This illustrates a Norwegian pilot project in which CO2, carbon dioxide, from a cluster of factories, that's on the east side, in the Oslo Fjord region, is literally shipped to a port on the west coast of Norway. From there, it is injected by pipeline on the seabed to the Sleipner field and up to a platform or platforms to serve a cluster of 4 geological subfields with an area of around 7 square kilometers each. That's the kind of scale you need in order to sequester a realistic amount of carbon dioxide. Some of the carbon dioxide may instead be used to generate so-called blue hydrogen, as Roger and previous speaker outlined, to compete with Norway's own green hydrogen sources. Now, in the right-hand diagram, this shows a platform in the North Sea. The depth of the North Sea is the thin blue line towards the top, which shows you just how deep this is, though this is not in scale. The platform is pumping carbon dioxide down into suitable layers of rock. Each of these strata has an impermeable layer over it, over its full extent, to make it a discrete field for sequestration. And next slide, please. I'm getting there. Now the map is from an imaginative research paper in 2014, 7 years ago. If anybody published a map like this now, I should think it would be secret for gas and oil companies' commercial reasons. The map shows where clusters of factories could be linked into suitable geological formations in former oil and gas fields under the North Sea. The important bit's the text at the foot of the slide. Now the UK government has identified several industrial areas of the UK, and there's an extra one each time I look, that could be included in such a grand scheme. They are receiving, each of these is receiving government funding for drawing up plans to coordinate local capture and collection of carbon dioxide. The infrastructure to do so would have to include pipelines or shipping services to transport the CO2 under pressure in a quasi-liquid form. These would transport the CO2 to coastal gathering stations so as to be pumped to the offshore platforms for sequestration, as we saw in the Norwegian case. Final slide, please. So, in summary, there's far more to carbon capture, let alone utilization and/or transportation and permanent storage, than first appears. While some pilot projects are going ahead and technologies are being refined, the economics are still far out of kilter. I would mention that this afternoon I heard of a process that will reduce to 1/7 the cost of hydrogen, but that's in bye-bye land for now. Immense infrastructures will be required via national and international cooperation, and most of the technologies are unproven at an experimental stage, far from any commercial application. Next slide, please. That's all.
Thank you very much, John. That was Roger Lovegrove and John Webb of Transition Town Letchworth on hydrogen as a fuel for heating and transport via grey, blue and green methods, and bio, carbon capture, utilisation and storage. Do we have any questions or comments for John? I've got anything popping up. Is anybody waving at me?
Slides, so people can see the references if they're interested.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Right, well, looks like that was informative enough that no one needs to ask any questions. And yes, we can make the slides available to pass on for references. Now moving on to discussion regarding the contributions to this meeting. Would anybody like to bring up anything that has, well, would anyone like to bring anything up from tonight's meeting? I see Roger's waving.
Just something for the 2050s onwards is helium-3. No one's talking about helium-3. There's none on the Earth, but there's tons on the Moon and some of the moons of Saturn. But a milligram of helium-3 would power London for a day if we could only capture it and utilize it. The technology, well, 10 years ago, they were saying the technology should kick in about 2050. But in the long term, if we can capture helium-3 and make use of it, the world will have free energy, because it's an enormous source of energy that could be very freely available, and it will completely revolutionize mankind's problems in the world. I'd just like to leave you with that thought. Put helium-3 into Google. It's wonderful, but not in my lifetime.
Roger, are you honestly suggesting that we mine the moon?
Well, another statistic for you: 3 space shuttles per year of helium-3 coming back from the moon would provide all of man's power requirements. If just put helium-3 into Google, and it's not rocket science, and one wonders why the big powers like China and so forth are trying to get to back to the moon. It's from helium-3. You heard it here first.
Thank you, Roger. I'm wondering about damage to the moon and things like the tides and stuff like that. But anyway, that's probably another conversation because it's now getting very late. Do we have anyone else who'd like to bring in a comment or ask a question regarding tonight's meeting? No, I don't see any. Oh, Steve and John both have their hands up. Sorry, they didn't show up for me before. So if it could be reasonably quick, Steve, would you go first?
I think mining the moon is probably on the capabilities of North Arts Council. in the short term. But looking at some of the things that West Suffolk has done in terms of community energy, I think certainly is, and I think that we need to make sure, as Keith suggested, that Steve Crowley's team and Sam Collins are made aware of this, and we need to talk to West Suffolk about how we can do some of those things. It looks to me like they have environmental benefits, they have benefits for financial benefits for council, and also they potentially provide benefits for local businesses as well. And if West Suffolk can do it, then we must be able to do it. And I think we need to get people from those teams looking at that. We've already spoken about what we're doing in our own buildings, but I think that's really the learning point from tonight is to see how we can do what West Suffolk seems to have done so successfully.
Thank you, Steve. John?
I guess a similar point, I guess, to Steve. I think it was the West Suffolk that I thought was really insightful. And I guess I had a silver bullet comment, of which helium-3 is probably the most distant, but there's a number being touted that, I guess, at least from my personal opinion, tend to be used to say that some of the hard decisions and some of the difficult choices can just be put off for 10 years and then it'll all be easy. And I don't think this is ever going to be easy. And the longer we leave it, the harder it gets. So yeah, I found the West Suffolk thing really interesting. There was a lot of stuff that can happen now. Well, nearly now.
Yes. Thank you, John. Right. If there aren't any more comments or questions, no one waving. Right. I will wrap this up because it's now nearly 10 o'clock. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Thank you for being here. And the presentations have been fantastic. I hope to be able to get those passed on to anyone who wants to take a look at them. Thank you, everybody, for attending as the public and participating. It's been a really educational meeting. Thank you so much for sticking around to this late hour. And I guess I'd bid you good night and hand back over to Penny and Louis.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Okay, good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.